right, I think we're good. And of course, right on cue, my neighbor decides that she's going to use the blower. She loves to use the blower, my neighbor. She's blowing leaves. I don't know what she's doing out there. Vacuuming the driveway. I don't know. So, so hopefully you can't hear that. No, anyways, it is what it is. So, oh, so we got, okay, good. You can't hear, that's good. Yeah, it's leaf blower season. This is where you do your fall cleanups. So all the landscaping crews are out and about with their very loud equipment. So we got good news this week, right? Another one of these vaccines are going to be very effective. So, I mean, that bodes well for, I mean, obviously the health of the world, you know, but also for teaching in the future and attending classes as a student. Because they're thinking we're certainly going to be online, I believe, for the entire spring semester, unfortunately, but there was also talk of being online in the fall of next year as well. But if these vaccines are now becoming available, I think that they're going to change their thinking on that, because we could reach some degree of safety and herd immunity, you know, during probably at some point during the spring semester. So yeah, so hopefully we can get back to a normal life, which is, you know, really what I'm looking forward to. And so it's really promising. It's really good news. It's a lot more effective than, you know, what they expected. And now that we have two companies that both sort of got the same kind of efficacy results, you know, really sort of substantiates the initial claims. And there she goes. She's gotten on high gear now. So I don't know. So hopefully you can't hear that, but yeah. So I think it's good news. It's actually really good news for health in general. This is like a new technology, a new approach to combating all sorts of diseases. And so really, this is really the beginning of a new day in our approach to combating like any kind of pathogenic disease, right? So any kind of disease that's created through viruses and bacteria, things like this. I mean, this is an approach that appears to be very effective. And so, you know, the flu is probably next. But this company, Moderna, that produced this vaccine, they're going to use this technology to attack cancers, heart disease. So it's just a way of sort of enlisting your own immunity to fight whatever diseases your body is confronted with. And so the hope is that, yeah, this is really proof of concept of a way of making us a lot healthier in the future. So really excited. Not much, not anything new on the democracy front, unfortunately. Hybrid, some online in the spring. So hopefully your feeling is correct. We will see. I mean, we'll likely achieve, I think, some degree of herd immunity, which would make it safe for us to return in the spring semester. So, you know, perhaps that is an option. Okay, they made up the professor by her. So I have a feeling it would be a hybrid some online time. I heard that they wanted to do this. So what I've been told is that we're set for doing it online in the spring, but there was the expectation that we would also have to do that in the fall. So if they're rethinking it, they are going to rethink certainly what they're going to do in the fall. I think we'll be back to normal in the fall, particularly in the US. I think by then we will have produced enough vaccines to generate herd immunity. So I think that we'll be back to normal in the fall. The question is, will we be back to normal in the summer and in the spring? I don't know. I mean, hopefully we can get back in the spring, but we're going to have to see. Some schools are taking it, students for the first half. Yeah, I mean, a lot of schools did things like very differently than what we did here in CUNY. A lot of universities are, they're open for business. They're conducting classes, like normal. Well, maybe not like normal. They added some protections, but they're not having all of their classes online. So Baruch was a little bit different. I think this is the right approach. I don't know, let's start on this side of safety. So I think this was sort of the right way of doing it for now. It would be great if we can return to maybe some normalcy and maybe conduct some classes offline during the spring, but I guess we'll have to see. Yeah, as soon as I really wish Baruch would do this, yeah, so we'll see. We'll see what Baruch decides to do. That's all I know, from my vantage point. So we'll see. Not much changed on the democracy front. We still have a president who hasn't conceded. My feelings about democracy. I'm not much of a fan. We won't get into that though. So today we're going to talk about groups and teams. Very exciting subject. Let's see where we're at. But before we get into this, let's review what we covered last week. Last week was a big topic. We got into some deep issues, the meaning of life, things like this, probably unexpected for a management 101 course. But we talked about motivation, and we defined motivation as the psychological processes that arouse and direct goal-directed behavior, right? And so it's what drives us to pursue goals and want to achieve them. And what I introduced was this way of thinking about how motivation works, and that we experience reality in three different ways: psychologically, socially, and behavioral, physically. And that's sort of one way of thinking about the way we sort of interface with reality. And that we are motivated then to maximize our positive experiences and minimize our negative ones within each of those categories, right? And that's really what drives all of our behavior. It's what motivates, it's what drives us to get up in the morning. It's what gives us purpose. It's sort of the underlying reason for the purpose we have in our lives. It's what makes lives meaningful. And of course, this is going to differ the way this manifests, right? What you find to be positive and negative is going to differ between people. It's also important to pay attention to the processes that produce these positive experiences, right? So people need to be aware that these positive experiences exist in order for it to be motivating, and they need a belief that they'll be able to achieve, they'll be able to do whatever tasks are necessary to realize that motivating benefit, that positive benefit. And so, given that sort of framework, then we can make use of all of those different motivation theories that were given in the chapter as just examples of ways in which we can produce positive experiences. Because, if we make the claim that what underlies all motivation is this desire to maximize our positive experiences, it begs the question, what is a positive experience, right? What is the difference between a positive experience and a negative one? And so we can maybe look to these motivation theories to answer that particular question, right? They give us ideas on what we might find positive, right? And so things like autonomy, the ability to sort of have control over how we do our work, to participate in the decisions that affect our lives, that affect outcomes in our lives. We're concerned about things like equity and justice, right? So we want to be treated fairly. And knowing that we're being treated fairly is another way of producing a positive experience. Then I ended with the recorded lecture with the topic of positive psychology. So positive psychology is a discipline within psychology that focuses on trying to understand what it is that produces these positive experiences, right? So there's a sort of a whole discipline dedicated to this. And so I think it's worthwhile to borrow a lot from that field when we think about ways in which we want to motivate people. And one of the theories to emerge from this discipline is this thing called PUNCTUATED, which is an acronym for the different ways that generate a life that they characterize as flourishing. So if you want to maximize your well-being, if you want to maximize your positive experiences, then if you're doing that, you're living a life that's flourishing. And the way to do that is to hit on these 5 items that they list in this PERMA acronym, right? So positive emotions, you want things to be fun, you want things to be interesting, you want things to be exciting, right? These are ways of generating positive emotions. And of course, we would put this in the psychological category. Engagement is another thing that we can put in the psychological category. But this is sort of getting lost in the work that you do. You don't need to know this for this course, but there's this concept known as flow. And there's a lot of work, and there's a popular book written on the subject. And flow is a state that someone achieves when they're completely immersed, when they're completely engaged in the work that they're doing. And so people might experience this when they're playing a video game. They may experience this when they're being creative, right? If you're drawing or playing an instrument, or if you really enjoy your work, you can experience flow, which is maximizing your engagement in your job. And so you want to think about ways of sort of producing that effect. Of course, relationships, this is a common thing among a lot of motivation theories. We are social creatures, so having positive relationships, getting recognized for the things that you do, this is all an important part of generating positive experiences. Achievement, right? So you want to feel as if you are doing your job well. You also want to feel that your job is contributing in some way that's important to the work that other people do and their outcomes. You want to have increasing confidence, so you want to feel as if you are skilled at your job and that there's growth and progress that you're making within it. And then the last category here, meaning, I think is one sort of item that a lot of people feel is perhaps the most important part of generating positive experiences, that you need to be doing something that's meaningful. And that just means you're engaged in something, you're pursuing some goal that is above yourself, right? So something like concern for the environment, right? This is not something directed at your own personal sort of benefit, but a larger benefit that you think is important. Environment, animals, or obviously social causes, right? So improving the lives of others. If you work for Moderna on this vaccine, clearly this is something that you're going to find, right, very meaningful. And then when I talked about meaning, I mentioned that there's this thing called, you don't need to know this for this course, but just sort of for your own benefit, there's this thing called job crafting, which is a way in which people try and inject meaning into their jobs that ordinarily might not be very meaningful, right? And so I gave the example of being, let's say, a janitor at some at a hospital, right, it may be difficult to find how that might be a meaningful job, but people actually inject meaning into their job through this process of job crafting by seeing their job in a new way. And it gave these janitors within the hospital an opportunity to see which patients maybe didn't have a lot of visitors, right? And so they took it upon themselves to spend more time in those rooms with the patients who had, less visitors, and they'll spend more time cleaning up that room. So this way, it gives them an opportunity to maybe connect with that patient, become friends with them, and maybe give them the social support that they wouldn't be getting, elsewhere, because they don't have like the visitors for whatever reason that a lot of the other patients have. So that's a way of injecting meaning into your job and making a job that's ordinarily not meaningful very meaningful. And then I ended with, actually I ended with that, but I also mentioned compensation and reinforcement. Reinforcement is this idea that it's important when you design your motivational processes that you pay attention to reinforcement theory, because it really sort of informs the way in which you want to design these programs. And so one of the examples that I gave was just being a student. We don't compensate students for their performance in this country. I don't know that they do it anywhere. There's been some experiments to see what effect compensating students for doing well, what effect that would generate. But we don't live in sort of a society that believes that we should be compensating students. I think this is wrong. I think students should be paid. I think when you do the work of being a student, you are participating in the productive process because you're learning sort of the skills necessary for you to be a productive worker. So it's part of training, right? And training is part of the productive process. So if you're going through training, right, to be a productive worker, you're contributing to production. And if you're contributing to production, you should be compensated for it. So that's sort of a moral argument, but you should also be compensated because we know enough about motivation to understand that people need to be compensated, and that's an effective form of generating motivation. And so there's been some research done in this area. Recently, there was a major study done by a researcher at Harvard. His name is Roland Fryer, and he did this massive study where he looked at the effect of paying students, and it was very effective. And we know from reinforcement theory, the way compensation needs to be designed so that it can be effective, and that is by paying. You want to reward behaviors. You want to reward behaviors that are desirable, right? That's the first thing you need to do. So you need to make sure that the connection in the minds of people receiving a reward, that they make the connection between the reward and the actual behavior that is desired. And so in the case of a student, you want to make sure you're not really compensating students for the grades that they get, because that's sort of an outcome. You want to compensate them for the work that they need to do to produce good grades, right? So you want to pay them for reading, pay them for completing exercises, for doing homework, these kinds of activities. And it's very effective, right? You also want to make the reward meaningful. So, when you pay a student $100 at the end of the year because they got straight A's in all of their classes, it's not going to have that big of an effect because it's so far off in the distance. Maybe it's not a lot of money. And there's a lot of effort that you need to put in to receive that reward. So those kinds of experiments have been conducted, and it shows that it's not very effective. But if I pay you a decent amount, like $100 per week for completing homework assignments, right? Now, all of a sudden it's making a difference. And we know the expectation that it is going to make a difference because of what we know about motivational theories and this concept of reinforcement. And so that completes the motivation topic. Do we have any questions on motivation before we move on to the new chapter? Okay, good. I'll make a recommendation, by the way, for Baruch to start paying its students instead of charging them. I don't know how far it's going to go. We'll see. Don't hold your breath, though, I guess. Yeah, so we're a long ways off before we get to the point where we're actually paying students rather than charging them. But that's a whole other issue. So anyways, moving on. So on the agenda for today we're going to talk about groups and teams and how groups develop into teams. And so I don't know, when you look at this chapter and you say, okay, what we're essentially doing here is we're defining groups and we're defining teams. How much sort of value is there with this? And I mean, admittedly, this is not like my favorite topic. This is not my favorite chapter. But it's probably reasonable to think that when you look at this chapter and you just look at how like a lot of it is focused on just sort of defining, creating these definitions that make distinctions between these two terms, like, is there a lot of value in that? And I think there's not a lot of value in understanding the difference between the word groups and teams so that you use it correctly, you know, in business conversation. There's not a lot of value in that. People will use these terms interchangeably, and I think that that's okay. But really, I think the value comes from when you focus on very clearly defining what a term is, you begin to notice then what differences there are among them. And I think the valuable sort of intellectual exercise in this is recognizing what those differences are and see if those differences are meaningful, right? And so sort of by doing that, we're able to better understand aspects of groups or teams that are important, right? So it's a way of sort of identifying what features about groups of people are very important to managers and important to academics in understanding the way these groups function. And so on the one hand, yes, it's, you know, a lot of this is dedicated to sort of just definitions, but I think the value in doing that is to see if we might recognize aspects of groups of people that are important for work outcomes. So that's what we're going to do. Hopefully that we get to that. And so there's going to be a distinction made here between groups and teams, and that there is, so when you sort of achieve this dynamic that we're going to call teamwork, there's lots of benefits to that. And so the goal here is to be able to elevate the functioning of mere groups to teams. So that's sort of a way of thinking about this chapter. And so in this table is listed some of the benefits of becoming a team. And so if we can achieve this state of teamwork, these are the kinds of benefits that could be produced. So things like increased productivity. Groups of people that work as a team, they're more productive, right? So they're able to produce more widgets. You know, it depends on what kinds of tasks the group are performing, but they do it more efficiently, more effectively. Increase in speed, right? And so an increase in speed is obviously going to increase productivity. There's a reduction in costs, and so that's an improvement in efficiency, an improvement in quality. And so like all of these outcomes, these are positive outcomes that you look for within organizations that's going to improve the functioning of the company. So according to this table, right, let's see, improve work cohesiveness, a reduction in destructive internal competition. These are all sort of desirable outcomes, right? And so it's worthwhile to see if we can get to the point where we elevate mere groups into this thing called teams. So what's the difference between a group and a team? So a group here is defined as two or more freely interacting individuals. So it's a group, so it's more than one person. They interact, that's an important feature. They share norms, they share goals, and they have a common identity. So we can probably make a distinction between a group and a crowd, right? So if you're walking down the street and you see an accident, people are going to gather to look to see perhaps what's going on. That's a crowd, but the people are probably not going to interact. You're not going to interact amongst yourselves, right? So you're not quite a group. So there's a difference between a group and a crowd. And so there's something about a group where you're actually going to be interacting with each other that makes it a group. A team is a small group of people with complementary skills who are committed to a common purpose, performance goals, and approach for which they hold themselves mutually accountable. And so I think the distinction now between, so what's the difference between a group and a team? They share a lot of common elements, right? They're both not mere crowds, but the difference is that a team sort of has this common purpose, right? And so you may be part of, let's say, a work group where you're all, I don't know, computer programmers, right? And you're working on the website. So you may have sort of a common task that you're all performing, but you don't have a common purpose, right? So there's not one specific thing that's going to unite you all. And so exactly what that is will become clear as we sort of develop this definition. But within a group, people can work independently, right? And they can sort of pursue their own independent goals, right? There may be some aspect of, you may be working on different websites, right? Some may, as part of the programming group, they work on the back end website where others may work on sort of the front end. And so you can pursue these sort of individual goals within a group. Within a team, there is this sort of common purpose among you that's going to unite you in a way that's different than just groups. So getting back to groups, so we can make a distinction between formal groups and informal groups. Another feature of groups is that it's usually going to be directed by like some manager, right? So management will direct you to become a member of some group, right? So you're going to get hired by a company and they're going to put you with the website development group, let's say. And so within those groups, there's going to be formal groups. And so that website development group might be the formal group. But informal groups will also form. And this is maybe just, there'll be some people within that group that you might become more friendly with, right? And so those friendships that, those cliques that begin to develop, that would be more of, that would be a group, but it would be an informal group. It's not established formally by the company. And what's important about these informal groups is that they're going to impact the performance of the formal group, right? They may be a positive force, right? And so they may sort of reinforce the tasks and jobs that you need to accomplish within your group, but they may also undermine the formal group, right? They may disagree with the goals or the way the work's being done, or have some sort of disagreement with the company, whatever it might be, and they may sabotage the formal goals of the group. And so this is why paying attention to informal groups is of importance. Now, teams. There are also various types of teams, right? And so work teams I gave you as an example. They have a clear purpose that all members share. It's usually permanent. Members must give their complete commitment to the team's purpose in order for the team to succeed, right? So you're all working on this sort of common goal. And that's what's going to really define a team in a way that makes them different from a mere group. Another type of team is a project team, right? You might be assembled to solve a particular problem, complete a specific task, such as brainstorming new marketing ideas for one of the company's projects, one of the company's products, rather. Like an example of this might be, look, maybe you work for the Walmart organization. The Waltons, the family that founded Walmart, they're like the richest family in the world. They actually may not be as rich as Bezos at this point. Probably not, but they're going to be close. And if you look at the total family, their wealth is enormous. You know, it's more than $100 billion, and they spend a lot of money on educational initiatives. And in fact, they actually spend a lot of money forming schools that sort of compete with public schools. They're known as charter schools. This is a way of experimenting with new sort of educational models. So perhaps, I don't know, maybe you work for the Walton family, you work for the Walmart organization, right? And they have a lot of money to burn. And you have this now new idea that you learned from your management class that perhaps a good way to organize schools is to look at them more like a business and apply business knowledge and what we know about motivation to the organization of a school and a classroom. And maybe what we should do is pay students, and you come up with an idea to do this. They love that idea, and they create a project team to see this idea to fruition, right? That might be an example of a project team. You're going to head up. You don't have to head up, but maybe the Walmart organization or the Walton family will form a project team that looks into this idea of creating a school that pays students to perform. Cross-functional teams is something that you will likely encounter. And basically, it's a team constructed of members from different functional parts of the organization. So the team will consist of people from finance, from operations, from sales, right? And so if this team that was formed to look into this idea of creating this new educational model where we pay students, if this was a cross-functional team, and likely it would probably progress if the idea progressed and they liked it and you were serious about pursuing it, eventually you would need a cross-functional team to fully explore this idea. And so you would draw people from different areas within your organization. You want people from finance so that you can understand how is it that you're going to come up with the money to pay all of these people, right? Those are the kinds of questions that they're going to ask. These are the problems that they're going to bring up that are going to prompt, the necessary problem solving to address those issues if you're going to make this idea work. People within operations are going to want to understand, how the actual organization of this school is going to operate. Sales is going to be concerned with, your ability to attract students, right? And they're going to bring very different perspectives, right, to the team. They're going to have different questions, and so perhaps the progress that you make within this team will be more robust because you're addressing a lot of these issues that maybe you wouldn't think of if you didn't have members from these different departments. A self-managed team, this might be somewhat redundant because teams often are sort of self-managed. Teams are often given administrative oversight for the tasks that they need to accomplish. They're not going to be assigned a formal manager. So leadership, and we'll talk about that with the development of teams. But these are things that sort of emerge naturally within the team structure. So often teams are, and one of their defining features typically is the fact that they are self-managed. Whereas if you're part of a work group, there's already going to be a formal structure in place that has, a leadership element where that manages that group. And then, of course, another example of a team is a virtual team. And this is, we know a lot about now, right? Because we've all been forced to now work in virtual teams. But this is obviously where we're working over time and distance via electronic means to sort of achieve common goals. And technology really, is getting to the point where it makes this a viable option. And I think moving forward, and let me advance to the next slide here, because we're going to emphasize, given the current conditions, virtual teams, right? I think, so obviously, given the pandemic, this is requiring lots of organizations to work virtually, right? It's requiring us to work virtually. But even though the pandemic will come to an end, and it will come to an end soon, I think a lot of these virtual teams will persist past the pandemic. And there is an expectation that I think within a lot of companies that virtual teams is something that will stay. We won't all be 100% virtual, but it forced companies to really conduct these experiments to look to see how effective virtual teams can be. And there are lots of benefits to them, right? There is the reduction in real estate costs. You don't need all of this office space, and in Manhattan, it's super expensive. It's very expensive to have your employees work in a building that you're paying for. If they're working from home, you can save on those real estate costs. The ability to leverage diverse knowledge across geography and time means you can hire people who don't live in the area where you are conducting business, right? You can hire someone anywhere, right? And so you can tap into these unique sort of knowledge bases that exist maybe on the other side of the world or another part of the country that ordinarily you wouldn't be able to do. It would require you getting them to relocate, to wherever it is that your company is located. Now, given the fact that we know that there are benefits to virtual teams, that there's a way to make this sort of work, it gives you an opportunity to sort of leverage that opportunity. The other thing it does, it reduces commuting and travel expenses. Look, I have a lot of complaints about the way society is structured. I've mentioned I've got lots of complaints about democracy. We won't get into that. I have complaints about the way we run our educational system, but I also have complaints about our transportation system. It shouldn't take me an hour and a half to go from Queens to Brooklyn, but that's exactly how long it takes, because if I take the train, right, I got to cut through Manhattan, I got to make 25 stops, right? The train's got to go 15 miles an hour, so that takes me an hour and a half. If I take a car, I am stuck in constant traffic, and so it takes me forever to get to, Brooklyn's not that far. It's just a few miles. It shouldn't have to take me an hour and a half. And this is an issue that persists in almost every major city. You're not going to run into traffic problems, commuting problems, like if you live in the country, right? Because there's so very few people that live there. The distance will be a problem. But look, these are problems that I think are solvable. In the year 2020, right, we have solutions that could solve the traffic and commuting problem. but we don't adopt it. Anyway, I can go on a rant about traffic as well. I will spare all of you from that. Speaking of sparing, I just need to, okay. All right, I just wanted to confirm. So yeah, I mean, so where was I? So look, virtual teams, I think, is one way of avoiding traffic, but commute and travel expenses, this is a major issue for employees. I live very close to Manhattan, but I still got to, I got to sort of budget an hour's worth of my time in order to get to Manhattan, even though I live so close. This is an hour, each way. I used to live in Long Island, and I would commute to Columbia every day, and that was a nightmare. And the distance as far as miles is not really that far. It shouldn't, take me 2 hours, sometimes 2.5, 3 hours just to travel that distance. Anyways, this is an issue for workers. One way to solve this issue is through virtual teams, right? So maybe I think what's going to happen is I think workers will sort of split their time, maybe, right? And so some days they'll go into the office, other days they won't. I think that is likely going to be the way sort of organizations operate for a lot of people. It's not going to be 100% of workers, but for a significant percentage, I think they're going to take part of their time and work virtually. But of course, this is not, all benefits. There are challenges, and some of those challenges, it's difficult to establish team cohesion, communicating with people over a laptop. I'm connected also to a large screen TV, but even, with the large screens and multiple screens, it is still sort of difficult to make a connection. My connection with students is almost non-existent at this point because of this sort of barrier. And so it really sort of limits your ability to establish high quality relationships with people. So that's one of the challenges. And even just communicating and trying to understand what people are communicating. A lot of that communication is nonverbal, right? So you pick up on, all of these sort of nonverbal cues to understand really what people are trying to tell you, and you miss out on a lot of that when you operate virtually, and all you can do is, video chat with people. So that's an issue as well. So yeah, so it's amazing how much effort some professors are making to keep these virtual classes as engaging as possible. Yeah, I mean, and it's a work in progress. For a lot of us, we're not really sure. I didn't teach last year, so this is the first time I'm teaching virtually, and the way that I'm sort of conducting this class is based on what I've been told by other professors of sort of what works and what doesn't. So it's great that you are experiencing some professors who are doing a good job at it, keeping it engaging. It's very difficult. It's very, very difficult to make classes engaging. I see that there's limited sort of opportunity to keep the classes engaged. I can probably do a lot better job at it. But yeah, I mean, hopefully though, we can return to, I think, look, there are certainly, pros and cons to conducting classrooms virtually. For me as a teacher, I think it's better if we do it sort of face to face. I have more experience doing it that way. And as I compare the two methods, certainly I see face-to-face traditional classroom experiences as superior. But there is a way of designing superior virtual and online-based curriculums. That's not what we're doing here. I think if you were to go entirely online, you have to rethink the way courses are delivered. Right now, we're just sort of trying to replicate the classroom experience through a computer, and there's lots of limitations in doing that. I don't know. Yeah, so that'd be interesting actually in knowing like in what ways these professors made the classroom engaging. I don't know if you got anything you can think of off the top of your head that you want to throw in the chat, but I'd be interested in seeing, hearing what sort of those ideas are and what you find worked. Anyways, breakout rooms. Ooh, interesting. So breakout rooms and surveys. So I think surveys are pretty good. It's interesting that you say breakout rooms, because part of my plan was to do breakout rooms, but the experience other professors had with it was that they weren't all that effective. And again, I think this really sort of speaks to the point that people are different, right? And so there's never going to be one size that fits all for everyone. Clearly, that you're the kind of person that, responds well to breakout rooms. Maybe I should have tried breakout rooms. It was up for consideration, and I decided against it, given the experience other professors had with them. But I don't know, maybe that was the wrong decision, who knows? So interesting that you say that. Surveys, yes, polls. I think that can add to it. Maybe I need to do more surveys and polls, and we can do that. I've had a few. It's a good way of prompting discussion. I also thought about whether they were sort of the catalyst for more participation. The evidence was limited though, so I don't know. So anyway, so thanks for the info. Yeah, maybe I need to do more polls and surveys. So anyways, getting back to teams. So there is a model that researchers have developed to better understand how groups develop into teams. It's presented here. This is a very popular one, Tuckman's 5-stage model. And again, like I mentioned with a lot of these theories, I think it's useful to think of teams sort of going through this process, but it doesn't mean that it's necessary for groups to sort of progress along this specific trajectory, and that's the only way it can deliver a high level of performance. That's not the case. It doesn't have to go through this stage. Not every group will go through the stage. Not every team will be the product of going through this sort of 5-stage model. But I think it's good to go through each of these stages because it highlights some of the elements that are probably important to creating that sort of teamwork that produces the kind of positive results I listed in that first slide. And so according to this model, we first go through the forming stage. And really this is, and you can think about, I'm sure a lot of you have done group projects within some of your classes. And so as you think about each of these stages, it might be useful to think about your experience in working in group projects with other students. And so the first stage is the forming stage. And this is really where people are just sort of getting to, you've been first sort of introduced to the group. People are just getting to know each other. You're sort of probing to maybe understand what structures might be in place. So you're asking questions like, do I fit in here? And really the goal in the forming stage, this very early initial stage, is for people to just get acquainted with each other. And that's sort of what you want to accomplish in that first stage. And then after that initial stage, once people, get to know each other, you get a sense of, what this group is like, you enter the storming stage. And in here, this is where personalities emerge, roles and conflicts begin to emerge within the group. And there may be now, like, so some students may have stronger personalities, right? And so they may want to emphasize in a strong way, what kind of project, what the direction of the project should be, maybe if the project is you have to write a group paper, they may be saying, suggesting in a very strong way that it should be this topic. And then there may be others who are saying, well, I don't know, maybe that's not quite the right topic. And so there could be sort of conflict over what the topic of the paper is going to be, right? So over the group's goals, there'll be conflict and it's okay to have that conflict. And so leaders here sort of want to encourage that because it could be a way of, it's a creative process. It's a way of generating lots of ideas so that you just don't settle on a single one and, limit how well this paper is. And so for here, you sort of, as a leader, you want to be able to, and I should mention that it's within this stage that leaders begin to emerge. And if there isn't a leader already, people are going to vie, for that role. And I think the task for leadership in this stage is to allow those conflicts to happen. So this way you can generate lots of ideas. And that's really sort of the purpose of this storming stage. After the storming stage, you get to the norming stage. And at this stage, the conflicts have been resolved. So, people sort of now agree maybe what the topic of the paper is going to be. People agree on what tasks are to be performed by, which members of the group. And so now, processes and a direction begin to become established. And so at this stage, for leaders, what you want to do is now you want to emphasize unity. You want to diminish conflict, right? Because now conflict at this point might sort of undermine the progress of the group. And so you want to emphasize unity. You want to help identify team goals, team values, things like that. The elements of a group that create that solidarity, that cohesion among them. And so that's the norming stage. And then after the norming stage, you enter the performance stage. And this is really the stage where a group sort of becomes a team, where that teamwork begins to develop. And this is where what you really want to do is you want to empower people to perform the roles that they are filling, right? And so now you want people to perform, right? You want people to accomplish the tasks that they've been assigned. People agree with the tasks. They agree with the roles that they are performing. You agree with the direction, right? So everyone knows what part that they need to contribute to the paper. You know what kind of paper you're going to write. Now you want to make sure everyone does their job as effectively as possible. And so there's a coaching role that you would play as a leader. There's a supporting role that you would play in this stage. And then really that's sort of the bulk of the, that is in the performance stage. Hopefully, if you're a high performing team, that is the stage in which you will do most of your work, right? Because that's where most of your productivity will come from within that performance stage. Teams likely will have a duration to them, right? So at some point in the future, they will likely come to an end. And so the stage 5, I don't think was a part of the original theory. I think it was sort of an add-on, but the adjourning stage is really the stage that a team enters when they need to break up, right? So the paper's completed, the course is over, whatever project you were a part of has come to an end. And so there's a transition period where people sort of, disconnect from each other. And some of the things that you might want to do here are, you want to help with that transition stage. There may be some sort of ceremony, like a graduation or something like that. Some teams do mock funerals, when the teamwork comes to an end. It depends on how long the team lasted for and how closely, how close the relationships were that formed. That will sort of dictate the kind of adjourning process that you want to adopt. But one of the things you want to do as a leader is, look toward the things that worked well and sort of emphasize and highlight those elements that made the team productive, that made people work well, that generated that sort of unity, that minimized unproductive conflict. You want to emphasize those elements so that when workers go on to their next team, they can contribute in a more meaningful way, in a more effective way. So that's the adjourning stage. That ends the model. Is there any questions about Tuckman's 5-stage model of group and team development? I don't know what your experience has been working in student groups. For me, when I was a student, it was, I guess, somewhat mixed. I don't know. Working in student groups can be a challenging environment, and in many ways, it's can be more difficult than what you would experience working in groups in a workplace. Because of the way that you are evaluated, right? And so the evaluation is very specific and very personal when you work on a student group project, right? You may get a grade for your group project, and that grade gets assigned to every member of the group. That's the way some people, some professors, some teachers sort of manage group work. And that could be challenging, right? It could be challenging accepting a grade for the work that a group did, when maybe the group didn't perform at a level that you were used to working at when you work by yourself. And that sort of dynamic is minimized in the workplace. People aren't going to assign you grades that become a part of your permanent record when you work for a company. So in some ways, it's easier to sort of work within teams in the workplace. All right, so this is my last slide. We're going to end here, and this is just sort of another model of group change. It's called punctuated equilibrium. Of course, not every group team is going to sort of go through those stages. Another way in which groups evolve or teams evolve or how they change is through this idea of a punctuated equilibrium. And the basic idea is that you are at this sort of steady state, you're at this equilibrium, you are performing well, you got your systems in place, people are happy with their roles, you could be performing at a very high level, the teamwork is, excellent, there's group cohesion, and then there's some sort of event that disrupts it in a very significant way. And that event can be a number of different things. One thing could be a disruption in the actual marketplace that you're competing in, right? And so if you're Walmart, you are a force for disruption within the retail industry, right? And so if you worked for a company that competed against Walmart, prices were not as much as an issue as they are today. And all of a sudden you have these higher priced items, and Walmart, enters your neighborhood, and you have to compete against this organization, and they are offering prices that are so much lower than what you were able to offer, that it's a major disruption to the way that you are doing business. And so whatever teams are formed around producing those kinds of outcomes get completely disrupted, and you have to rethink your approach to business so you can deliver in a way that makes you effectively compete against this organization that is somehow producing, these extremely low prices. That could be an example of a disruption. Now, if you're at Walmart today, you are being disrupted by an organization like Amazon. Now people are saying, yeah, low prices are great, but I don't want to head out to my local Walmart, superstore and have to drive through all of that traffic. We don't like traffic, right? All I can do now is just, click a few buttons, on my computer, on my cell phone, and I can get, whatever I need delivered directly to me. And so Amazon and the whole e-commerce approach to retail really disrupted the entire retail industry, and that impacted Walmart significantly. And so teams, who were working well within Walmart and enjoying their position of dominance, and how they were able to outcompete all of these mom and pop operations because they were able to deliver prices that they were not, and they were sitting pretty. All of a sudden, they are now getting outcompeted because Amazon came along and is able to offer these very low prices and, in a way, deliver the products and services in a much convenient form by doing it online. So they had the response to that. So that would be an example of a way in which the equilibrium, the steady state, would be punctuated because of some sort of external shock to the system. So any questions about punctuated equilibrium? I mean, this stuff is pretty clear. It looks like everyone is clear on it. I don't know, maybe the lack of engagement means I need to issue more surveys, some polls. I don't know, these are things for me to think about to see if maybe I can produce more engagement. Maybe we'll try a breakout room. We'll see how that goes, right? I don't know. Anyways, if there are no other questions, we will end it here. But before we go, we have the paper that you need to write for this course, the self-reflection paper that is going to be due at the end of the semester. I am going to upload an example of what's expected for this kind of paper to help sort of orient your thinking about how to successfully write this paper. Because one of the things that I'm going to be looking for is that it's sort of structured and formatted in the right way. And so I'll give you an example of what that sort of structure is supposed to look like. So I'll upload that, and then we'll talk about the paper next week. But otherwise, have a great week. I will stick around as usual if anyone has any additional questions. But I will see everyone next week. Have a great week.
Thanks, Professor. Have a good one.
Thank you.